to go back and spend time with my young parents. I mean, they were younger than I am now, so it was nice to do that.
Steve Jobs was a genius. He changed the world with the iPhone, the Mac, and so much more. But behind the success, there was pain, deep personal pain. He struggled with family, especially when it came to his daughter, Lisa. For years, people wondered what really happened between them. Was he the loving father he claimed to be? Or was there more to the story? Now, after staying quiet for so long, Lisa has finally opened up, and what she shared, it confirms what many have always suspected. Join us as we take a closer look at Steve Jobs' complicated life and the truth his daughter finally revealed. A complicated start and an unusual childhood. Steve Jobs was born in San Francisco on February 24, 1955. His parents were Joanne Schiebel and Abdul Fattah Jandali. Jandali was the youngest of 9 children in a wealthy Syrian Muslim family. He studied in Beirut before moving to the U.S. for a PhD. That's where he met Joanne, a Catholic woman from Wisconsin. Joanne's father didn't accept their relationship because Jandali was Muslim. When Joanne became pregnant, she decided to give the baby up for adoption. She asked that the baby go to college-educated parents. A lawyer and his wife were chosen at first, but they backed out when they found out it was a boy. So Steve was adopted by Paul and Clara Jobs. Paul had dropped out of high school and worked many jobs, including mechanic and car salesman. Clara was Armenian and worked as a bookkeeper. After a failed pregnancy, they were desperate to adopt. Joanne didn't want to give Steve to parents without a college degree, so she went to court. But she changed her mind when Paul and Clara promised they'd pay for Steve's college in the future. Steve later said he was deeply loved by them and hated when people called them adoptive parents. He said, "They were my parents 1,000%. He called his birth parents nothing more than a sperm bank thing. Steve was a tough child. Clara even told his girlfriend Chris Ann Brennan that she didn't bond with Steve at first because she was scared someone would take him away. At one point, she even thought adopting him had been a mistake. But Paul built Steve a workbench in the garage, hoping to pass on his love of mechanics. Steve said his dad could build anything. When he built our fence, he gave me a hammer so I could work with him. I wasn't that into fixing cars, but I was eager to hang out with my dad." Trouble in school and the first spark of genius. School wasn't easy for Steve. He didn't like being told what to do and often got in trouble. At Montaloma Elementary, he misbehaved, played pranks, and was suspended more than once. Paul never punished him, though. He blamed the school for not knowing how to handle his son. Steve skipped 5th grade and moved into 6th at Crittenden Middle School. But he didn't fit in and was bullied. In 7th grade, he gave his parents an ultimatum: take him out of that school, or he would drop out. The family wasn't rich, but they used all their savings to move to a better school district. That new house on Chris Drive in Los Altos would later become the birthplace of Apple. At age 13, Steve cold-called Bill Hewlett from Hewlett-Packard and asked for parts for a school project. Hewlett gave him a summer job. Steve later went to Homestead High School, where he met Bill Fernandez. Bill introduced him to Steve Wozniak, Woz for short, who would become his future business partner. Steve didn't come from an engineering background, but he joined an electronics class. Still, he didn't enjoy it and clashed with the teacher. In high school, Steve started reading more, especially Shakespeare and Plato. "I loved King Lear," he said. His senior year, he joined a film project with Chris Ann Brennan. Wozniak had made a device called a blue box that let people make free long-distance calls. Steve saw a business opportunity and suggested they sell them. He later said, "If it hadn't been for the blue boxes, there wouldn't have been an Apple." He believed this proved they could take on big companies and win. Around that same time, Steve started using LSD. He once said he took it in a wheat field outside Sunnyvale and had the most wonderful feeling of my life up to that point. Right after high school, he and Brennan moved in with a friend before he left for college. A college dropout who still loved to learn. In 1972, Steve went to Reed College in Oregon. He insisted on applying only there, even though his parents couldn't afford it. At Reed, he met Robert Friedland and got into Eastern mysticism. Steve said, "There was a constant flow of people stopping by, from Timothy Leary to Richard Alpert. Everyone was asking questions about the truth of life. After one semester, he dropped out without telling his parents, but he stayed around campus, attending classes unofficially. He loved one calligraphy class and later said it inspired the fonts on the Mac. He lived simply, sleeping on floors, returning Coke bottles for money, and eating free meals at the Hare Krishna temple. Years later, in a speech, he said, "If I had never dropped in on that single calligraphy course in college, the Mac would have never had multiple typefaces or proportionally spaced fonts." In 1974, he returned to his parents' home in Los Altos and got a job at Atari. He had earlier shown them a circuit board that Wozniak had built. Atari thought Steve had made it and hired him. Nolan Bushnell, the co-founder, called Steve difficult but valuable and said he was very often the smartest guy in the room and he would let people know that. Later that year, Steve and his friend Daniel Kotke went to India to find spiritual guidance. They visited a temple, but the teacher they wanted to meet had already passed away. Steve returned to the U.S. after 7 months. He had shaved his head and wore Indian clothes. He experimented with drugs and called LSD one of the most important things he'd ever done. He also practiced Zen Buddhism and did silent retreats at a monastery. He even thought about becoming a monk in Japan. But life took him in another direction. Back at Atari, he worked on a game called Breakout and brought Wozniak in to help. They were promised a bonus for reducing the number of chips. Wozniak made big improvements. Atari gave Steve $5,000, but he told Woz they only got $750 and split it. Woz didn't find out the truth until years later, but said he would have given Steve the money if he'd just asked. Around this time, they also went to meetings at the Homebrew Computer Club, which helped inspire what came next. Steve was even arrested once in Oregon for an unpaid speeding ticket. He said he paid the $50 fine and moved on. The rise of Apple and the legacy that followed. In 1979, Steve saw something amazing: the Xerox Alto. It was a computer with a mouse and graphical screen. That moment changed everything. It led to the creation of Apple Lisa in 1983, and then the famous Macintosh in 1984. The Mac was the first mass-market computer with a graphical interface. It helped launch the desktop publishing world when Apple added the LaserWriter printer. But behind the scenes, things were falling apart. In 1985, Steve lost a power struggle with Apple's CEO and left the company. He took some Apple employees with him and started a new company called Next. Next focused on high-end computers for schools and businesses. In 1986, Steve bought the graphics division from George Lucas. It became Pixar. Pixar would later make Toy Story, the first fully computer-animated film, and many more hits. In 1997, Apple bought Next and brought Steve back as CEO. Apple was close to going broke, but Steve turned things around. He teamed up with designer Jony Ive and launched new products like the iMac, iTunes, iPod, and eventually the iPhone and iPad. The iPhone changed everything. Steve also led the Think Different campaign and opened Apple stores. He even served on the board of Gap Inc. from 1999 to 2002. But while Steve was busy changing the world with technology, his personal life was also shifting in a big way. Around this time, he met someone who would become the love of his life, a love that started with one look. Steve Jobs first saw Laurene Powell when he gave a talk at Stanford Business School in 1989. She was sitting in the front row and he couldn't take his eyes off her. He even said he kept losing his train of thought and started to feel a little giddy. After the talk, he ran into her in the parking lot and asked her to dinner. That one meeting turned into a lifelong connection. Jobs proposed to her on New Year's Day in 1990, and they got married in March 1991. It was a small Buddhist ceremony at Yosemite National Park. Jobs' spiritual teacher, Kobun Chino Otagawa, led the ceremony. Only around 50 people were there, including Jobs' dad, Paul, and his sister, Mona. The wedding cake was shaped like Yosemite's famous Half Dome, and things ended with a snowball fight thanks to Laurene's brothers. Jobs even joked with Mona, saying, "You see, Mona, Laurene is descended from Joe Namath, and we're descended from John Muir." That same year, Laurene gave birth to their first child, a son named Reed. Just a year and a half later, Jobs' adoptive father, Paul, passed away. Jobs' childhood home became a popular place for people to visit. It's now owned by Marilyn Jobs, Paul's second wife. Steve and Laurene had 2 more daughters after Reed. Erin was born in 1995, and Eve followed in 1998. Eve grew up to become a fashion model. The whole family lived in Palo Alto, California. Although Jobs had become a billionaire by then, he made it clear that his money wasn't going to be passed down in full. Like Bill Gates, he wanted most of his fortune to be used for other purposes, not just handed over to his kids. Regret, reconnection, and his first daughter. Steve Jobs' relationship with his first daughter, Lisa Brennan, was complicated. Lisa's mother, Chrisanne Brennan, once said that after Jobs was pushed out of Apple, he changed. He told her many times that he was sorry for how he treated her and Lisa in the past. He admitted that he should have taken more responsibility and that he deeply regretted not doing so. Over time, Jobs and Lisa built a stronger bond. When Lisa turned 9, he had her name legally changed from Lisa Brennan to Lisa Brennan Jobs. Lisa's mom, Chrisanne, said that their co-parenting got much better. She gave credit to Mona Simpson, Steve's sister, for helping make that happen. Mona encouraged Steve to step up and be a better father to Lisa. Steve had only met Mona after going on a journey to find his birth family. That journey didn't begin until after his adoptive mother, Clara, passed away. Steve always loved Clara and Paul Jobs, and he didn't want them to feel like he didn't see them as his real parents. He once said, "I loved them so much that I never wanted them to know of my search." Even when reporters found out about his birth family, he asked them not to print it out of respect for Clara and Paul. But when Clara got sick with lung cancer in 1986, Steve started spending more time with her. That's when he got curious about his biological background and started asking questions. Clara gave him more details about his adoption, and that pushed him to dig deeper. On his birth certificate, he found the name of the doctor his birth mother had seen. That doctor had passed away but had left a letter behind for Steve. The letter revealed that his birth mother was Joanne Schiebel, a graduate student from Wisconsin. Steve wanted to know more. Finding his birth mother. Jobs didn't reach out to his birth mother, Joanne Schiebel, until after Clara had passed and he had gotten Paul's permission. Even then, he kept everything quiet and asked the media to stay out of it. He said he felt a deep need to know who his mother was, not out of anger, but to make sure she was okay and to thank her. "I'm glad I didn't end up as an abortion," he told his biographer. Joanne was emotional when they finally met. She didn't know much about Apple or Steve's life, but said she had been forced to give him up for adoption. She told Steve how sorry she was and that she had never stopped regretting that decision. After that meeting, they stayed in touch and became friendly. They even spent holidays like Christmas together. During that first visit, Joanne gave Steve even more surprising news. He had a sister. Her name was Mona Simpson, and she didn't even know Steve existed. Joanne helped set up a meeting between them. Mona was living in New York at the time, and they met there. Meeting Mona and forming a new bond. When Mona first met Steve, she had no idea what to expect. She later said that he came across as kind, honest, and just a normal, sweet guy. They went for a long walk to talk and get to know each other better. But things weren't perfect at first. Steve later shared that Mona wasn't thrilled about having a new brother suddenly appear, especially since their mother became very affectionate toward him. Still, over time, they became close. "As we got to know each other, we became really good friends, and she is my family," Steve said. "I don't know what I'd do without her. I can't imagine a better sister." Steve also spoke about his adopted sister, Patty, saying they were never really close, not the way he and Mona became. For Mona, learning about Steve changed her life too. She dreamed that her father would come back into her life one day. She even hoped he'd be rich and kind and would help them out. For Steve, meeting Mona and reconnecting with Lisa helped bring more meaning to his family life, something that had once felt like a painful mystery. The truth about Steve's birth family. When Steve Jobs found out more about his birth family, a lot of things started to make sense. After giving Steve up for adoption, his biological mother, Joanne Schiebel, married his father, Abdul Fattah Jandali, just 6 months later. They had another child together, a daughter named Mona. Jandali later said that after earning his PhD, he returned to Syria for work. While he was away, Schiebel left him, and they divorced in 1962. He admitted he lost contact with Mona for years. "I also bear the responsibility for being away from my daughter when she was 4 years old," he said. Eventually, they reconnected and stayed in touch. He even arranged a trip for her to visit Syria and Lebanon with a relative. Later, Schiebel married again, this time to an ice skating teacher named George Simpson. Mona took his last name and became Mona Simpson. After another divorce, Sheeble moved to Los Angeles with Mona and raised her alone. But this wasn't the end of the family story. Years later, Mona discovered that their father, Jandali, was living in Sacramento. She went to meet him. Steve, however, refused. He believed Jandali hadn't treated his children well. A newspaper article added to his doubts. It said Jandali had once abandoned students on a trip to Egypt in 1974. Steve didn't want anything to do with him. Mona visited Jandali alone. He told her he had left teaching and was now running a restaurant. He even mentioned giving a child up for adoption. He added, "We'll never see that baby again." He didn't know he was talking about Steve Jobs. Then he mentioned that Steve used to eat at his restaurant. "Oh yeah, he used to come in, and he was a sweet guy and a big tipper," he said. Steve later said, "It was amazing. I had been to that restaurant, and I remember meeting the owner. He was Syrian, balding. We shook hands. Still, he didn't want to meet Jandali. I didn't trust him not to try to blackmail me or go to the press," he explained. He asked Mona not to tell Jandali who he really was. Jandali eventually found out from a blog. He called Mona and asked, "What is this thing about Steve Jobs?" Mona told him the truth. But she said, "My father is thoughtful and a beautiful storyteller, but he is very, very passive. He never contacted Steve." Steve never showed interest in meeting Jandali or in his Syrian roots. Mona later turned this experience into her 1992 novel, The Lost Father, The Final Hours and a Moment of Peace. Steve Jobs passed away on October 5, 2011. He was at his home in Palo Alto, California. The cause was complications from a relapse of a rare form of pancreatic cancer. The cancer had caused his breathing to stop. Jobs lost consciousness the day before and passed with his family around him. His wife Laureen, his children, and his sisters were all by his side. Mona Simpson, his sister, shared the powerful final moment. She said Steve's last words, spoken hours earlier, were soft and simple. He said them 3 times. "Oh wow, oh wow, oh wow." Before that, he looked at his sister Patty, then at his children, then at Laureen, and finally passed them all. Then he closed his eyes. A private funeral was held 2 days later on October 7th. The details were kept private out of respect for the family. But that wasn't the end of the tributes. Right after the news of Steve's death broke, Apple and Pixar both made public announcements. Apple said they would not hold a public service but gave fans an email address where they could send messages of remembrance. Flags flew at half-staff at Apple and Microsoft headquarters. Disney also joined in, with Bob Iger ordering all Disney properties, like Walt Disney World and Disneyland, to fly their flags at half-staff from October 6 to 12. For 2 weeks after his death, Apple's official website showed only a grayscale photo of Steve and his name with his birth and death years. On October 19th, Apple employees held a private memorial at Apple's Cupertino campus. Laureen was there, along with many others, including Tim Cook, Bill Campbell, Norah Jones, Al Gore, and Coldplay. Some Apple stores even closed for a short time so employees could join. A video of the service was later shared on Apple's website. The state of California also honored Jobs. Governor Jerry Brown declared October 16, 2011 as Steve Jobs Day. On that day, another memorial was held, this time at Stanford University. The guest list included tech leaders, media figures, celebrities, politicians, close friends, and family. It was a private event and security was tight. Even helicopters flew overhead to watch the area. Bono, Yo-Yo Ma, and Joan Baez performed during the event. At the end, everyone was given a small brown box as a farewell gift from Steve. Inside was a copy of Autobiography of a Yogi by Paramahansa Yogananda, a book that had meant a lot to him. After his death, many people who knew Steve shared their thoughts. Steve Wozniak, George Lucas, Bill Gates, and even President Obama made statements in his memory. As per his wishes, Steve Jobs was buried in an unmarked grave at Alta Mesa Memorial Park in Palo Alto, the only cemetery in the city that is open to all religions and backgrounds. But while the world remembered Steve Jobs as a genius and visionary, his daughter remembered something else, something far more personal. Behind the fame and success was a father-daughter story that took years to fully unfold. A painful denial and a long-awaited confession. Steve Jobs was a tech icon, but as a father he had serious flaws. His daughter, Lisa Brennan Jobs, wrote about her life and her relationship with her father in a book called Small Fry. One of the painful memories Lisa carried for years was her father denying that the Apple Lisa computer was named after her. This hurt deeply, especially since Jobs had also denied for a long time that he was even her father. In 1982, he told Time magazine that 28% of the male population of the United States could be the father, even though a paternity test had proven he was. Over the years, he went back and forth, sometimes showing love, other times being cold and cruel. This strange and emotional tug-of-war made things very hard for Lisa and her mother, Chrisanne Brennan. Jobs even told people that Lisa, the computer, was named after an old girlfriend, but Chrisanne said that story was nonsense. And then one day, something finally changed. It happened during a lunch with Bono, the lead singer of U2. Bono asked Jobs about the Apple Lisa. He said, "So was the Lisa computer named after her?" Lisa held her breath. Jobs paused, looked down, and then quietly said, "Yeah, it was." Lisa sat up straight in shock. That was the first time he ever admitted the truth. Bono simply said, "I thought so." Lisa turned to him and said, "That's the first time he said yes. Thank you for asking." In that moment, she felt a new kind of strength. She wrote, "Of course it was named after me. His lies seem preposterous now." The truth had finally come out. But why did it take a famous person like Bono to get it? A complicated childhood and a cold home. Lisa Brennan Jobs didn't grow up like most kids. Her father was one of the most powerful men in tech, but she often felt unwanted by him. In Small Fry, she shared memories that were hard to forget. She remembered how her father refused to put heating in her bedroom. She even remembered him saying she smelled like a toilet. Lisa explained that the comment was about her perfume and that her father was just being blunt. "He was telling me the truth," she said. "Sometimes it's nice of someone to tell you what you smell like." But stories like this show just how awkward and harsh their relationship really was. Lisa said she never felt in danger, but she did feel very uncomfortable. One moment in her book stood out. Jobs and his wife, Laureen Powell Jobs, were being intimate, and Lisa tried to leave the room. But her father stopped her and said, "Hey, Liz, stay here. We're having a family moment. It's important that you try to be part of this family." Lisa sat still, looking away, as the moment continued. It was strange and confusing. Writing about it later, Lisa didn't seem angry, just sad and lost in the memory. She tried hard to understand her father, but his behavior often left her feeling out of place in her own home. Even the smallest gestures or words could turn into moments that stuck with her forever. A father who struggled to love. As she grew older, Lisa began to see the differences between her father and other men. In an interview with the New York Times, she talked about her husband, Bill, who has 2 daughters. Lisa said, "I see my husband in the way he is with his daughters, responsive and alive and sensitive in ways my father would have liked to be." She believed that Steve Jobs wanted to be a man like that. He even surrounded himself with people like that. But he simply couldn't be that kind of father. Their relationship was full of missed chances. Toward the end of his life, Jobs did say sorry. He told Lisa that he regretted not spending more time with her, ignoring her messages, disappearing when she was an adult, and even forgetting her birthday. Lisa called that moment her movie ending, the final apology she had waited for. But even this apology had a strange twist. Jobs told Lisa that he wasn't angry because he was busy. He said he was mad that she didn't invite him to her Harvard weekend. That reason shocked her. Still, she tried to understand it. She believed that her father lived by a strong value system, but he couldn't always follow it. She said, "You can have a value system and be unable to totally live it." She also said, "He didn't do it right. He didn't apply it evenly, but I feel grateful for it." These words show how deeply she wanted to find peace. Lisa wasn't trying to make her father look like a villain. She was just telling her side of the story, the one that many books and films had left out. A family's response and the question of memory. When Small Fry was published, it made headlines. Lisa had shared private stories, and not everyone in the family agreed with her version of events. Steve Jobs' widow, Laureen Powell Jobs, his children, and his sister Mona Simpson released a statement together. They said the book differs dramatically from our memories of those times. Their statement continued, "Lisa is part of our family, so it was with sadness that we read her book. The portrayal of Steve is not the husband and father we knew. Steve loved Lisa, and he regretted that he was not the father he should have been during her early childhood." They added that it brought comfort to Steve when Lisa was with them in his final days. "We are all grateful for the years we spent together as a family," the statement said. Lisa had also mentioned that she was included in her father's inheritance and received a sum in the millions. However, she said she's not involved in how the rest of the money is managed. She even joked that if she were in charge, she'd donate it to the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. When asked if that would be too strange, given her father's rivalry with Microsoft, Lisa replied, "Would it be too perverse? I feel like the Gates Foundation is really doing good stuff." Lisa didn't write small fry to attack her father. The book wasn't full of blame or hate. Instead, it was filled with honest moments, pain, confusion, and forgiveness. Lisa wrote not just about the bad, but also about how she found peace. She looked at her father not as a genius, but as a man who tried and failed, who hurt her and helped her, who couldn't always live up to the ideals he claimed to believe in. And in the end, she still managed to see beauty in that. Do you think Steve Jobs truly made peace with Lisa before he passed away? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more incredible stories from Hollywood's fascinating history. See you next time.